All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Motley Crude, your new favorite Warhammer Old World podcast. I'm Kevin, and we've got a really sick episode for you guys tonight. But before we get into that, how are we all doing?
Doing good. Excited for this one. I know it's your army, but it's also one I've had an eye on for a while, so it's going to be interesting to talk about them.
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped too. And then, I'm excited to talk about this. And then, Ryan, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. And yeah, this is going to be interesting because Chaos Dwarfs was the first thing I played against in the old world.
Yeah, and
ever.
I think you've got more experience playing into them than like 99% of the world at this point.
Oh, possibly.
Possibly. On mine, I'm doing great. It's been a good few weeks, hobby wise. So let's roll right into that little segment there. So how has your hobby been, Ryan?
I've been picking away at my Bretonians for the tournament in Toronto in October. I haven't made like huge progress. Otherwise, I've just been busy with Baldur's Gate and the D&D game I got roped into running. So a little all over the place.
What percentage painted are you at this point?
Like I'd say 75, like to get to quote unquote battle ready, which is really only like 90% painted, would probably take me like a week of effort. Like I just have to go through and paint like the metal on swords and like the leather parts. Everything else is done.
Okay, so you probably got this in a month.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And then what about you, Andrew?
I've been digging away at my Dark Elves now that I got my Necromunda gang finally all painted for the campaign I'm playing in. I still got quite a bit to go, but I'm actually making really good progress with the time I have. I forgot how, not in a bad way, but like not very detailed old world models are. Like they still look cool, but having come from painted like a lot of 40k and Age of Sigmar and even Necromunda stuff, like there's a lot of like added details on those models that maybe aren't 100% necessary. It's just all like glitz and glam. Like these guys are, I'm working on my chaos or my cold one nights right now, and it's a lot of just like skin and metal and then just like straps and shit. So like I'm actually pounding through them pretty quickly, which is nice. I also finished a bunch of other I did all my characters for the army, and I have a unit of Dark Riders like basically half painted ready to go. I just got to do like the final washes and then like a little bit of highlighting. But yeah, like I'm going way quicker than initially I thought, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to make it to or at least have the army all the way painted for the S-Bot in Toronto. Maybe not the basing because I use this like weird snow effect stuff, and it's kind of a hassle to like apply to the base in a way that looks realistic without it being like very time consuming, because it's kind of just like lumpy Play-Doh that you kind of have to spread out and like make nice. So that is very time consuming. But even if I don't get that far, like I have a base coat of like just texture paint anyway, so they'll be good enough. It's just I won't be 100% on that, but we'll see how far I get. I'm pretty sure like the army will be painted. The basing might not all be the snow bases.
That's fine. And like I think you're totally on point there with the army being created in the before over designing phase of Games Workshop unit sculpting. So yeah, you burn through them a lot quicker than you do for your newer models for sure.
What do you mean Warp Talon trim isn't the greatest thing to ever be added to models?
Exactly. Or the what's the flyer in the Chaos Army there, the robot chicken.
Drake?
Yeah, the Helldrake. Yeah, that's
you know what the trick to that is? Metallic spray paint and a gold Sharpie.
Yeah, exactly. And then you fill in the holes that are not trim in the middle. Okay, yeah. any of you guys played any games?
Oh, I got my
Not
teeth kicked in on against High Elves. So
Nice. Was it like a crazy double star dragon list type situation?
no, I just can't roll dice.
Okay.
One Star Dragon, Sea Guard, a couple Sky Cut, like a character on a Sky Cutter and another Sky Cutter, and some Bolt Throwers, and some Sisters of Avalorn, and some Silver Helms. But like my Pegasus Knights, like charged Silver Helms and then died because they couldn't hit them, and then the Silver Helms beat them to death with hand weapons. So
Nice.
it
You've been
was
having
bad.
terrible luck with those peg knights.
Unless it's into Savage Orcs.
Yeah, exactly. And did you play any games, Andrew?
I got one game in of Necromunda for my campaign. I haven't had any old world games. Just I haven't had time. I started a new job and I'm working almost every day. At least Necromunda, you can pound out a game in less than an hour.
Sure.
My last game was like 20 minutes, just the way the scenario went and how well I rolled. I kind of rolled my opponent right quick, and the game was over super quick. So it's easy to play that as opposed to finding time for 2 hours of Old World at the moment.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I should be getting back into it once I get through this next couple week stretch of events at my work.
Nice. Yeah, that's the benefit of skirmish games is being able to wrap those up, and especially like those older style rule sets from GW where like enemy bottles in the first 10 minutes of a game or whatever, and then you could really wrap it up quickly for sure. Yeah, on my end, it's been a pretty productive hobby time. So I finished those two Amazon models for my Mordheim Warband, which I think I showed you guys actually, like the two test models to try out the scheme. I had to take a bit of a pause on continuing to develop that warband though because I modified my list after CCBB, which means that I had to paint up some bolt throwers, some hobgoblin bolt throwers. So I managed to paint up the 4 machines, and I'm about, I think, halfway or 2/3 of the way through the 8 crew members that go with them. So that was some like pretty productive painting time, and then I managed to get 3 games in since our last episode. So I started with a narrative campaign game against. It was a 3-way battle of my Chaos Dwarfs, some orcs, like black orc themed orcs, and then just all of the Empire Knights and demigriffs that you can imagine. As per the tradition of this narrative campaign, I think our organizer just hates me, and it's always a case of the enemy seems to have 4 times the army than that I bring to the table. But this is life. That ended with a 3-way draw. Nobody managed to achieve their objectives, so that's that. I then played a game into our local buddy Cleary, with who brought the double Tomb King Dragon fun list to play against. I got completely smashed brutally. I sort of rocked up to like a Tuesday evening game, not too worried, deployed sort of willy-nilly, and then paid the price for it. There was a chance like later on in the game where I could have sort of swung things back a little bit, but did not, and just got my ass roundly handed to me. And then I played a third game into dwarves, so the ultimate grudge match, Chaos Dwarves versus dwarves. It was the Expeditionary Force. It's the first time I played that Army of Infamy. I think it's a really cool list. My buddy brought like some miners that popped up behind me with great weapons and were just annoying, a bunch of gyrocopters, a bunch of war machines, a bunch of 2 units of rangers also, just like all the shooting. It was a really fun game and a fairly big win for the Chaos Dwarfs in the end. So I guess I'm 1-1-1 in terms of games played over the last little bit there. So that was my my hobby. So rolling into the main sort of topic for tonight. So we'll be
Actually
talking.
lied.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go
Actually
ahead.
lied. I did actually get a game in. I
Nice.
forgot. 2 weekends ago, I ran an RTT at a local store, Multi-Zone. And last round, one of our players had to drop, so I did step in as the ringer. So I did actually play a game against local player Jason against his Beastmen with my Dark Elves.
How did the game go?
It was interesting. I lost, but not by much. He had a big block of Minotaurs, a big block of Gores. He brought the new Chaos spawn.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. How was the gigantic
Yeah.
one?
Uh, it's not as scary to face as maybe initially thought. It is very strong and it's a little depressing when it bites you and heals a wound with that one special attack. Now I dumped my dragon into it, so like I was fairly fine. I thought I could have, pushed him in one round of combat, and I almost did. Like I think by the end of the game, or like by the end of that combat, like I charged him the first round of combat. I maybe did like 4 wounds to it. Um, and then in the following combat, I got it down to 1 wound essentially, and then I kind of like gave up. Like he got the 2 inch pushback, and I just kind of flew away because I'm like, I don't want to keep tar pitting into this.
Mhm.
So I instead tar pitted into his gores instead with my dragon, which was also a stupid thing because like yeah, I was killing them by the bucket load, but like they just wouldn't flee. So I'm just like, oh, I'm wasting all my time here. So yeah, I just kind of played bad with my dragons. My witches basically obliterated his Minotaur unit with the hag. I ran my hag with the D3 extra attacks on top of her frenzy and the ogre blade, so she was just melting them. But then he got a weird flank charge on me, and I wasn't thinking, and I could have moved my hag into the fighting rank because my fighting rank would have been my flank, right?
Mhm.
But I was just like, oh, like it doesn't matter, whatever. And he ended up winning the combat that way, and then it broke the whole unit. But if I did move that hag into the flank, like it was just a chariot, so I probably would have just exploded the chariot as well. But that was just like a misplay on my part, not thinking. So it was pretty close. I think it was like a 12-8 or like a 13-7 win for Jason with his Beastmen. And again, he played well, and I think I just wasn't thinking. I was a little rusty because I haven't had that many games in yet. But again, people who think Dark Elves aren't good, it was just misplays on my part as opposed to the army not being able to do what it needed to. Like the dragon was a champ. The Witch Elf army, or the Witch Elf block was great. The Charybdis was great. My Dark Riders. I'm still not good at like using fast calf effectively, but they still did, some work. So I wasn't. Yeah, I still like the army.
Yeah, and like your opponent's not a pushover. Like Jason's is a good player who always does well at tournaments and brings like a good list too. So it's not like
Yeah, exactly.
all right, cool. So yeah, so pivoting to our main topic for the evening. So we're going to be talking tonight Chaos Dwarf Tactica. So we're going to be talking. We're not going to be doing a book review. We're not going to be like going unit entry by unit entry and just going over all the details. We'll be instead hitting on like some sort of bigger, more conceptual items. So we'll be talking about things like, how does the army function at a macro level? What are some of its strengths and weaknesses? We're going to be talking about what's the Chaos Dwarf's path to victory on the tabletop, like the win conditions that the army has to sort of achieve in order to win a game. Some standout units, items that you can build your list around. Speaking of lists, we're going to talk about list building. We're going to talk about individual matchups, like how do they do into Bretonians, for instance, or into High Elves or whatever. Does the faction have play at a competitive level? And then Andrew, who's been looking at the army, is going to give us his prospective player list, and we're going to review that and talk about it. So we're kind of privileged or not, depending on your perspective, in that we've seen a lot of Chaos Dwarfs in this group. I play them a ton at a number of events, of course. And as we mentioned before, Ryan has played into me quite a bit, and then Andrew has also been into me. So like everybody has some experience on either side of the table looking at this. So hopefully it'll bring everybody. Everybody will bring something good to the table here. So we're going to start off with overall thoughts on the army. Like, how would you describe the army in a nutshell? What are your thoughts and feelings having faced them on the tabletop? And then, is it a hit or a miss for you in terms of army design? I think I'll jump in right from the get-go on this one, guys. Just because I'm pumped to talk about my army with I think a pretty interesting take to kick this off. So I think that at their core, Chaos Dwarfs are a skew list. They're absolutely a faction that skews quite heavily in a certain direction, and that's a high toughness, high leadership, strong defensive rules, stuff like stubborn, for instance, and shield wall, and decent armor save army. That, on the other hand, has below average damage potential and mobility when compared to others. So tabletop wise, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot, but the skew of the army means that it's really matchup dependent in terms of how it does. You'll feel really solid on the tabletop when you have your good matchups, and then there's some builds that are just you're not really tooled to deal with very effectively. And then finally, for me, before I pass the speaking baton over, is I think the army's an absolute hit in terms of army design and identity. There's a lot of flavor. They brought back some old favorites when they created the legacy army, and I think everything is cohesive in terms of the story that the army's telling. So that's my overall thoughts. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I think you're right with the Chaos Dwarves being a list that you'll want to skew with. But just to go off of that too, they do have a few different options on how you want that skew to go. You can either go like very shooting heavy. You can also do like just mass hordes of like cheap shit with the hobgoblins. You still have access to some fairly decent like fast cav with the hobgoblin wolf riders, as well as like the heavy cav in the bull centaurs, which are pretty horrifying to face across the table with an elf army at least. So yeah, like I think they do have a lot. Again, just like dwarves, that high defense, high leadership. So you can make these very like static defensive lists. Personally, I think they probably can make the best gun line in the game. I know you probably don't agree with that because you're not so you don't seem too happy about their artillery, but I think it's probably some of the best stuff outside of having access to like great cannons or regular cannons even. But yeah, I really like the list. And you do have different avenues of play as well as like just really strong magic. So you can do like that really shooty, magic-y list, which is kind of what I tried to go for, but we can talk about that later. Yeah, it's a cool army.
I think there's going to be some contention when we get to the shooting part of the list, but that's totally fine, and that's why we're here. But before we get there, what about you, Ryan?
It's like punching a brick wall.
Yeah.
Like they. Now, with that said, it's like punching a brick wall, except for the fact that once my knights touch a unit of what are they called? Your regular infantry.
Yeah, Infernal Guard.
Yeah,
Infernal
they just
Guard,
kind of like disintegrate once they get caught. But the thing is, you have so many things preventing me getting there, or it's a trap. That it's still kind of a pain. But yes, overall, the army is just it takes a punch and it hurts you. And I do think Kevin's right that their overall damage output may not be insane. And to Andrew's point, if you do go down the War Machine route, just like combat Yahtzee,
Yeah,
you're just going to be like big swings. So you might do a ton of damage, you might do nothing, which is cool. But no, I think both you are on point that the army has a very strong identity. It does exactly what you'd think Chaos Dwarfs would do. They're that kind of cool mix of chaos and dwarf.
Dwarfness.
Realized it sounded way lamer after I said it that way, but they have big hats. It's fine.
Fair.
But no,
Fair
like
enough.
it's even fun. It's an interesting exercise to play into because everything's going to be durable, but it's not like playing into regular dwarves where you also know that they're just going to stand there in a rectangle and shoot you with troll hammer torpedoes. So
Yeah, I
that's
think you're
nice.
right. Like it presents a unique problem on the tabletop. Like there's no other army that's quite like it. And yeah, I think it's a good thought experiment and just a tabletop experiment to play into them. And then, which is like, speaking of them on the tabletop, like let's talk about some of their strengths, weaknesses, and sort of the win conditions. So, like, starting with strengths, what has been your perspective? And you've probably touched on some of this there, but Ryan, but like playing into them.
Yeah, so they're the biggest thing that I find that I need to overcome when I'm playing into them is the fact that like you just now you don't use a lot of hobgoblins, but in general, like I'm overcoming toughness 4 or higher, often toughness 5 or better, all the time. And then you get through that, and they probably still have a 3 or a 4 up save. Um, or yeah, heavy armor and a shield. So like a 4 up save. And, good leadership, and then rules like stubborn and drilled and close order and shield wall and
Yeah.
veteran. So it's just a lot of things going for keeping them not dying in a game about killing things. And that has been the consistent issue is you couple that with a handful of very powerful, very expensive units, and it becomes very, very difficult to, get points off of the army. But at the same time, that plays more into the weaknesses later, but I guess you also do have a weird situation where if someone can overcome that toughness barrier, you kind
Exactly.
of have like a cascading system failure problem.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm at.
Yeah. That leans into the skew aspect of once you break the code on high toughness with those specialized tools, then it's just a rough go after. Cool. What about you, Andrew?
For strengths, yeah, they're just very defensive. So like, the expectations of dwarf defense, high toughness, high armor. That's really like a good strength. But they have a little bit more mobility than like a regular dwarf army would as well, with access to like flying monsters, um, the aforementioned bull centers, and the fast cav with the wolf riders. So it's weird facing them because you're like, oh, it's a dwarf army, but then it doesn't play like in your head what a dwarf army should, especially with like their access to magic as well. So this might be controversial, but I do feel like this is the better dwarf list just because they do have access to things like level 4s, which gives them a little bit more defense against uh, offensive magic towards them.
Yeah.
But still having all the benefits of being a dwarf, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I don't think it's super controversial, at least probably not on this podcast. I do think they're the better dwarves in terms both of lore, but also on the tabletop. So, yeah, on my end, I think there's like 4 things that I would say are like big strengths for the army. So, firstly, you guys have mentioned it, like resiliency is the greatest strength of the army. Unit profiles, items, and even the spells you get build into this. And you're going to be at an immediate advantage against anyone who's not packing like specialty tools when they rock up to the table. And by specialty tools, I mean strength 7 plus attacks, and like a decently reliable way to get them and in a decent volume, because of some of those big pieces that Ryan mentioned. If you don't have that, it's just going to be a tough battle. Secondly, I think the Chaos Dwarfs are like a well-rounded roster, which goes back to what you were saying, Andrew, and they've got options to compete in each phase of the game. So there's decent cav, there's decent infantry, there's some good monsters in there. There's a few misses, but in general, you've got a pretty well-rounded roster. You can at least, you're never going to really dominate the Magic game, but you can compete in the Magic game also. Thirdly, I think Chaos Dwarfs are quite a good counter punch army. And this will feed into some of the matchup discussions that we have later. But because, as you guys mentioned, you don't take a lot of damage when the enemy comes in, you're in a pretty good position to be able to whittle them back on the counter punch, which is a thing that not a lot of armies sort of handle well in this game. And then lastly, I think they're just like a fun characterful thematic list, which is also super important given the amount of time and commitment it takes to bring an army to the table. And I'm really happy to see that they've got options beyond what was available in 8th edition or the sort of the Tamarkan era Chaos Dwarves, and they brought back some really old stuff, which is cool. But pour one out for the Kadai Destroyer, though. That guy should have made the transition. So now that we've talked about strengths, what are some of the weaknesses that you guys see on the tabletop, either from playing, looking at them, or just in general? Andrew?
I think part like coming from like list writing, I feel sometimes they're a little too spoiled for choice. Like there's a lot of options in the list that you want to take, or you can see the benefit of having in your army, but a lot of it's like very points heavy. So when I was writing the list, like I was like, oh, I want this, and then I realized like I'm way overcosted. Like I haven't even bought like characters or magic items yet. It's just like, okay, like how do I whittle this back to still be like a cohesive force that's going to be able to play on the table? So again, that goes back to like needing to do a skew list where it's like, okay, I can't have this generalized like all comers list and still try to be effective. So you either got to like go in a certain direction. I feel like that's kind of the list downfall, is because then you're getting into sort of like rock paper scissors play in terms of like how your army's going to compete against others. Other than that, like just the general sort of dwarf, weaknesses of like, well, they're a little slow. They have low initiative on a lot of the stuff. Even the hobgoblins, I think, are only initiative 3, right? Let me double check that right quick. I have it up.
Yes, so some are certainly a lot higher. Like the cons have incredibly high initiative, but you're right that the
right,
rest of the
but they're characters though, right?
Yeah.
So like just like your general foot sloggers, yeah, they're initiative 3. I just got it here. So like you don't have a lot of like high initiative. So even if you are getting the charge against shit like high elves or demonettes and things like that, like you still might not be going first. And again, with their movement, chances are you're going to be the one getting charged as opposed to you being able to pick your fights and do those charges. But again, that's just more of like a generic dwarf issue all around as opposed to a Chaos Dwarf specific thing.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit less of an issue with Chaos Dwarves than is with regular dwarves, because not your whole army is infantry, but like fully agreed. And I think just rolling into some of the weaknesses, like I'm pretty much where you are, Andrew, in terms of your thinking, and sort of when you talked about list building, that feeds directly into my first point, which was, so army builds are kind of restricted for the army at a competitive level. Like, sure, if you're just playing in your garage, you could do whatever, and like all lists work. But when you try to compete a little bit more with the army, it becomes more difficult. So I think the toughness skew is probably, well, I'm pretty convinced at this point, is the best way to play them competitively. But you can definitely still write an all comers list or a gun line type list, but I think those are kind of suboptimal. So you're a little bit pigeonholed into the toughness skew. Second weakness, I would say, is their below average damage potential, which means that you sort of struggle into some matchups that are like stats checks in terms of damage. So monster mash type lists is a good example. Anything that's undead, anything that's like save stacking writable monsters is another issue that you're going to struggle into, because your damage is fine for chipping away at like Peg Knights and Knights of the Realm, but more of an issue when you roll into something that's, I don't know, double dragon Tomb King shenanigans or whatever. Third weakness, I'd say, is you don't have a lot of utility in this army to control the flow of battle. So, like, your magic is, I would say, is average, but you're missing some of the best lores that allow you to control the battle space. So, stuff like battle magic, illusion would be another really good lore to have in this army that you don't have. And then I'd say your item selection is subpar also in terms of utility, and we'll talk about that later. Then you mentioned it, Andrew. So mobility, you're more limited than a lot of other armies out there, which often means you're going to be reactive in the matchup. And then finally, another thing you touched on. Absolutely, I think that pound for pound, there's a number of units in the list that are overcosted. That really sort of struck me when I was preparing for the last episode, where we did Warriors of Chaos review and looking at some of the armies of infamy, and then I was just comparing what you get in like Skin Wolves, for instance, and what you get in Bull Centaurs or God forbid Kadai, and then you realize like, yeah, there's some inefficiencies here in terms of how the army's pointed. But I've gone long enough. What about you, Ryan?
My biggest takeaway from that I could see as a weakness is it's an army that benefits from kind of clustering together into like, yes, it's got mobility and it can reach out and like touch things, but that mobility is being used to shape you into fighting the like anvil that is the core of the army, which, as people have developed better understanding of the rules, can also be worked against you with things like feigned flight and whatnot, just pulling your cavalry away from all mutual support, being an issue. Or like, it's great that you've got what was that spell that you love, Storm of Ash, for example.
Yeah.
But then keeping your whole army within 9 inches of your wizard also does open up risks when people are just like, I brought 3 Doomdiver catapults. Woohoo!
Yep, exactly.
So it's just one of those, like, if the person is playing to maximize the benefit provided by the rules of the army, it almost completely telegraphs how you're going to play the army, which, like, it's not that surprise is super useful, but it's, it helps the other player make a plan when your options are almost completely not dictated for you, but like it's in your best interest to work to your strengths, which then just kind of helps the other player try and find a way to maybe pull your fast units out, isolate them, destroy them, and then you're just left with the big block or whatnot.
Yeah, I think you're totally correct. Like, in that some of the higher mobility options in the army are super matchup dependent, and like I'll talk about that later. Some stuff that I used to run all the time, I'm sort of moving away from just because my opponents have wisened up to like the game rules in general, and those pieces just aren't doing the work anymore. So yeah, with all that, with like strengths and weaknesses in mind, like what's the game plan for the faction on the tabletop, and then how do you guys see turning those game plans into victories? So I think I'll kick this one off. So I think that Chaos Dwarfs are probably the strongest points denial. You can play the strongest points denial game in the old world. There's a few builds of other factions that could sort of challenge you there, but like in general, you're just going to win by playing to your strength, as you mentioned in your sort of last intervention there, Ryan, and of like not dying and then chipping away at the weaker portions of the enemy's list. And not giving up a ton of points in return. So this is a faction, much like dwarves, which often you won't see like blowout victories or losses. I think I don't know how many games I've played, like a lot, and I can probably count on one hand the amount of times that it's been a 20-0, either one way or the other, or even like a 19-1 or 18-2 or whatever. Like this is quite rare with this army. And then like it sort of leads to these weird situations where when you're piloting the Chaos Dwarfs, you're like, oh boy, I think I'm losing this big time. And then at the end of the game, you're like, actually, I only lost like 300 points in my army and I won. So like again, the path to victory is points denial on your enemy. You chip away at some of the weaker portions of the list, and then you win a smaller or sort of medium sized victory at the end of it. Is that something you'd agree with, Ryan?
Yeah, that's generally been my my experience on the receiving end of it. Is that I'm going into things and we get to the end of the game and the big expensive stuff is still alive. I've probably killed a couple little units of infantry or something, but somehow the Iron Demon survives because my cannon has misfired 6 times in a row, or whatever. And that's that. Like, I think the closest I ever came was weirdly with my terrible peasant army, um, where it was just like I just baited you into fighting like 160 point units of peasants with very expensive Chaos Dwarf stuff. But that's where I'm. Yeah.
Yeah, and then and what about you, Andrew? In terms of how do you see the army winning games?
Honestly, I think that's it. Ryan said previously, like you want your opponent to sort of just bounce off whatever your anvil is, whether that's a big stupid unit of Infernal Guard or more points efficiently an Iron Demon or two. If they don't have answers for those, like, well, at least in terms of the Iron Demon, if they don't have an answer for that like super high toughness unbreakable war machine, like they really need to either find a way to avoid it or they're just going to get stuck, and then the rest of your army is going to be able to chip away and sort of get enough points to maybe sneak out a win. Again, I don't, unless something like goes crazy, like I don't see this list getting big 20-0s, as you said. Like maybe there's some cascading effect of a war machine hits a unit that dies and breaks or something, and then a big mass panic happens. But like that's a weird edge case. Like this army, I don't think wins big. It just kind of wins, like, if efficiently.
It's like a blue collar army. You just sort of grind it out, and at the end of the day, you pull out like an honest win, but not a blowout.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on that one for sure. And then pivoting to like when we're talking about the list, what are some and we'll do these by slots, I think is probably the best way of doing it. So like characters, core, etc. Like let's talk about some standouts in each of the slots. So Ryan, I'll let you kick us off and start talking about, like, just on your end, when you look at the character slot of stuff that's available to the army, like what are standouts and misses, and then what will you build a theoretical list around?
So I'm going to steal your thunder and just start with the Hobgoblin Cons are the greatest unit in this entire army. Um, just because, for, was it 45 plus a plus 10, somehow Giant Wolf is cheaper than a horse.
Yeah.
For 55 points, you can have a dude that just runs into the back of the enemy army, stabs some people, and is super annoying. And even if you want to make him cost 100 points and give him magic items, he's still only 100 points, and he's annoying.
Yeah.
So
then you can rock up with 3 of those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And then other than that, like, having a Black Orc War Boss, pretty cool. I'm a big fan of the Sorcerer Prophet. That's really what I've got. Like, I think if I was building an army, it would be like Sorcerer Prophet, 2 cons before any other decisions happen.
Yeah, my latest list is Sorcerer Prophet, 2 cons, and a War Boss. So yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So pivoting into characters for me, I think it's mostly good news in the character slot actually, and almost everything has a place. So you mentioned it, Ryan, the Black Orc War Boss. Like, this guy's an absolute unit. He's super points efficient when you put him on a Wyvern. So compared to some of the other writable monster mounts in the game, like a really strong option. And actually, I think the Black Orc War Boss on Wyvern is the best pure offensive output you have in the army, in an army that's looking for some offensive output. So I definitely rate this guy. He's great with I usually run him with a troll hide, trousers, amulet of protection, types, great weapon type build. But I think he's also a good candidate for the Ogre Blade, and I've seen him run that way also quite effectively. Then you've got the con on Wolves, which you've talked about, Ryan. They're like super cheap, and they're just great lone operatives to run in the backfield. Got incredible charge range with like rerolls. They reroll their attacks into flanks and rear. Solid stat line for like a piddly hobgoblin, and then just some Tactica for you guys out there. Bonus points for giving this guy like a ruby ring and being an absolute nuisance in the enemy's backfield. I've run 3 of these guys at the online S-Bot at 186 points for all 3 of them together collectively, and they've definitely won me games by like killing undead generals and causing the army to collapse, or charging a bunch of war machines and just being annoying. The Sorcerer Prophet, like you said, is just solid. He's your bog standard level 4 with some fun tricks like having armor and being an engineer type situation. And then the Dark Forge weapon could potentially make him a +5 caster for a game, which is like when your army goes onto sort of steroids and everything starts to be a lot easier. He's got some great mount options. Specifically, the Lamassu, I think, is the best one. Magic resist 3 on a caster is solid. He also ignores magic weapons. So if you attack him with, I don't know, the Dragon Slaying Sword, it counts as a hand weapon, which is really, really fun. You can make an okay combat character out of a Sorcerer Prophet on a Lamassu or a Taurus. But I mean, it's still, you're throwing your level 4 into close combat, which always comes with issues. And then the Tauruses as mounts, I think, are pricey for a sorcerer, which you generally don't want in combat. You'd prefer to be casting and dispelling. I think they're like worse than dragons, but they have a bunch of cool rules. The Castellan and like the Seneschals, you guys have never seen me take those. Like, they have a great stat line as the combat lords of the army. The only problem, and I would say the biggest miss in the Chaos Dwarf book, is that these guys can't be mounted. Like, the fact that you can't mount your combat characters just massively limits army construction. So, if you could take these guys on Tauruses, you would really open up the builds for the army, like both in variety. So you wouldn't need like the Black Orc War Boss. You wouldn't be such a crutch. And then in terms of lethality also, like a Castellan on a build Taurus plus a Wyvern, for instance, would just be an amazing 1-2 punch, and would open up like an actual aggressive playstyle for the army. And then finally, in terms of characters, there's also the Tauruks, like the Bull Centaur Tauruks. Those guys look great on paper. They have a great stat line. They're fun to use. They're mobile. I think you can do something really fun with having them with 2 Mantles of Stone, which is an item I'll definitely talk about later, and great weapon, which means you've got like a lone character for 200 points. That's Strength 7, Toughness 7, which is just gross. The problem is that he must come with a unit of Bull Centaurs. So that's an issue, because at that point it means he's basically costed the same as once you factor in that Bull Centaur unit as a Black Orc War Boss, which is just a better fit for your army. Again, I think he still has a lot more play than the combat characters, for instance, and like there are competitive, definitely builds where you run this guy, and I have in the past, but I think he's just a little bit outshone. What about you, Andrew? How do you see the character slot in the army?
I think you guys basically covered all the main points. Um, Someone who like is more interested in the sort of war machine gun line skew instead of like the points denial skew. Um, I wouldn't sleep on the Demon Smith Sorcerer, the level 2 caster. He's going to be chilling out back with your war machines to make use of the Infernal Engineer ability. But also he can be holding on to uh, the magic item that allows you to just straight up dispel a cast.
Yeah.
Let me find it right quick. Basically, like the old school
Yeah. Is it the Lamasu's
dispel
blood
scroll.
or something? Yeah.
Yeah, Vile
Yeah.
Lamisu Blood. It's 40 points, and it lets you just automatically dispel with no dispel roll required. So, that's a pretty strong piece of anti-magic tech that I don't think any other army has access to anything similar. Um, it is points heavy. Like, he's already an 85-point model, and you're giving him a 40-point magic item, but for real, like, he's kind of just there to bodyguard your war machines. Give him a good little magic missile, and you can just kind of sit back and try to pick off any sort of fast cav that come after your back line. So I wouldn't sleep on him. And again, parroting off what you said, it is unfortunate that your combat lord cannot take him out. Like, I think he'd be auto include if he can jump on like a Bale Taurus or something. But your Infernal Seneschal, like the hero level character, that's not a bad BSB platform to like kit him out and put him in a big block of Infernal Guard or even Infernal Ironsworn if you go that way, and just play that sort of points denial. We're never gonna fail leadership check. Gameplay style.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right on the Demon Smith. If you are running war machines, I think there's some good value there. For sure, I'm a little bit less hot on the BSB in this army just because nothing ever really breaks. So it kind of always feels like they're just sort of extra points. But like you're right, I think for 65 points, like he's a decent platform. The Seneschal, like uh, if you are looking for an infantry character to fight, I guess that doesn't really happen so often. But I get you're right.
Or even just to get like a second magic banner in a unit on top of like the one that the unit itself can take, so you can like double down on some of these abilities.
For sure. You're right. Definitely. Yeah. So moving into the core slot, Andrew, I think I'll turn this right back to you. How do you see like the Chaos Dwarf options for core, and you see any standouts or misses, and then what would you build your list around?
Yeah, they got some good options. Again, it's kind of like how do you want to build um your army around? Um, you are forced to take, that one block of Infernal Guard, but you can take them at a minimum and just give them like Hillshot Blunderbusses, and have like a little bit of ranged. But then you can either go like cheap Goon Swarm with the Hobgoblin Cutthroats, which I think they're like 3 points a model, 4 points a model, so you can get massive units of these guys for fairly cheap. And then you can take one of the best units in the Orcs and Goblin tribes list, the Black Orc Mob. I know you take them quite often. So I think all the choices are good in their own way. It's just how do you want your list to play, and it gives you sort of like very good options, especially like the Infernal Guard. You can give them sword and board and just make them super tough. You can give them the Fire Glaives, which is sort of like an in between of a great weapon and also like a half decent gun. You can give them the great weapons and just hope they don't all die on the charge. And you're hitting at like strength
6.
6. with AP2. So hopefully your dwarf toughness comes through and you survive like a charge, and then you're giving a fairly good like punch back. Or you can go like hail shot blunderbuss heavy, which I like them on paper. I'm just not sure how good they actually will be in game. They have very short range, but if you run them wide, you can get like a shit ton of shots off with them. I guess you'd maybe have more experience with that though.
Yeah, I'll talk about those. I'll let Ryan go. The only thing I will say is like your dwarf toughness on this army does come through. For instance, when you decide to rock up with the great weapons, and I've had Infernal Guard with great weapons like beat out Blood Knights, beat out kill a Necrosphinx, that kind of shit by just doing a bunch of Strength 6 AP2 attacks back. So I think there's definite play there. But before I jump into core slot, like Ryan, how do you see this picture?
Like in principle, I love the idea of Infernal Guard and the fact that they're both a regimental and a detachment unit, except for the
Yep.
fact that we all know that the regimental and detachment unit rules don't function if your enemy has a brain and just attacks the detachment.
Yeah.
Um, because like the premise of like I have Brick of Infernal Guard with mutually supporting blunderbuss guys, and then someone just charges the blunderbuss guys
Yeah,
and
and then there's a sad
not
trumpet noise.
yeah. And so that's like that's what I'd love to see. And the hobgoblins are also cool, but for some reason the short bows resonate with me, and I'm just imagining this strange hobgoblin gun line
Exactly.
arrows.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Because in 300 and 500 points, you could run something redonkulous like 100 and was it 80 probably hobgoblins with bows. So yeah,
yeah, they'd literally be in each other's way. It would
yeah,
be
yeah,
ridiculous.
for sure.
That's
Awesome.
all I got about core.
Yeah, so on my end, I think the core slot is good again, but it's going to lead you down the road of building a toughness skew list once again. I mean, you can get some good, decent damage out of the core too. That's not the issue. The issue is more that because you have no cavalry options in core, it's going to limit your army building. So you're either taking super tough Infernal Guard, super tough super tough and slow Infernal Guard, super tough and slow Black Orcs, or you're taking easy to kill but tough because of their number hobgoblins. So there's just not a lot of variety there. Like there's nothing like Silver Helm or Knights of the Realm or whatever that you could put in that slot. Like it would be a totally different army if you could bring Bull Centaurs in core or even Hobgoblin Wolf Riders in core. That would be like an absolutely different ball game. Speaking of like the individual options, Black Orcs, like they're phenomenal. They're possibly the best heavy infantry in the game. They're resilient, definitely, with the Motley Crew rule, which we've named our podcast after, definitely helping there. And they can dish out the hurt with great weapons for sure. Strength 6 is just an amazing breakpoint, probably the most important breakpoint for strength. Infernal Guard are worse than Black Orcs, but not by much. I think they're better defensively than Black Orcs. So when you look at weapon skill 4, strength 4, toughness 4, leadership 9, base 4+ armor save, drilled, stubborn, shield wall, like they're just a pain in the ass to get through and can be a ridiculously good anvil. Personally, I like the Infernal Guards lately with great weapons and drilled. And like mid-sized 12 to sort of 14 15 style units, like 12 attacks at weapon skill 4, strength 6, AP2 will wreck a lot of stuff in this game. And in my games at least, people have definitely underestimated the Infernal Guard. Andrew, you touched on this a little bit. Like shooting's also a good option for them. There's a buddy of mine who does a big block of Infernal Guard with Fireglaves, the Razor Standard, and Drilled. He moves them around with a Conveyance spell, and then it's all fun and games until your Chaos Dwarf basic infantry starts schwacking people at AP -3. So no, AP -4, sorry, with Armor Bane 1 there. So that's so there's definitely got play also with the Fireglaves. The blunderbusses. unfortunately, I think are not great. They're super expensive. They're low range. Their bonuses are tied to being in a really large unit. It's low strength attack, strength 3. I have another buddy who I played the mirror match into at CCBB, who had like 20 something Infernal Guard with blunderbusses. They shot my Wyvern for 4 turns straights, and I think did like 1 wound to it, maybe. Like, gotcha, it wasn't a good target for them, but I think Fireglaves would have just done better for sure. And then the Hobgoblin Cutthroats, they're like all the craze right now online, 3 points per model. I think they're good too. They've definitely got a lot of play. They can be like a big horde for you to burn through. Actually, correction to my earlier statement there, Ryan. It's 167 to fill out core with 1 million short bow shots. I guess my problem with Hobgoblin Cutthroats is, they won't do anything offensively, and then the rest of the army is already fantastic at not dying. So, like, what are you bringing to the table with Cutthroats that you aren't somewhere else, right? I'd much rather bring, like, a bunch of great weapon attacks to actually have a bit more punch in my army than just another thing that won't die, this time being numbers rather than actual toughness. So yeah, I guess that's my take on core. The big miss for me there is that there's nothing except foot slogging infantry. Let's talk about some of the other units. Not artillery. We'll talk about that after. So I think I'll kick this one off there for other units since I'm on a roll. Let's start with Iron Demons. Iron Demons, let's go. They're the second best unit in the book as far as I'm concerned after the Black Orc Warboss on Wyvern. These guys have an incredible stat line, like strength 8, toughness 7, 7 wounds, 3 up, armor save. They're unbreakable.
Carries an artillery piece.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what I would. Yeah, exactly. Carries an organ gun for shits and giggles. Like unbreakable trains from hell with machine guns is just amazing. They're basically an auto take. They're extremely hard to kill. They pack like the best. I think they pack the best shooting in the army. Strength 5 shot, like up to 20 shots, is brutal. And then like you all know that strength 8 impact hits and stomps are just no joke either. And then if you're thinking of taking these, always give them the Hellbound upgrade. It makes all their attacks magical, which is, much to the detriment of all ethereal units out there. Gives them terror, which is a fun rule, and a 6-up ward against non-magical attacks. I will tell you though, like Iron Demons usually won't make their points back at 310 with the upgrade, but they also won't die. So great news there. And then forget the Skullcracker. Like it's just not mobile enough, and it generally will sort of never get the charge off because of that mobility issue. So you just want the Steam Cannonade to like delete units coming in. Talking enough about these guys. Next one I want to hit on is Bull Centaurs. They're pretty solid. I think they just get outshone and outcompeted for points by the Iron Demons. I'd think of them, if you're new to the army, as like less good, less expensive Mournfangs, basically. The D3 impact hits like sounds really good for a cavalry unit, and it is good, but like remember that they're at strength 4, so that's helpful if you're a regular army. But if you're an army that struggles into anything that's higher toughness because of your low damage output, then like strength 4 impact hits probably aren't gonna carry you over the finish line there. And I think like the Bull Centaur's offensive output is okay. I mean, with great weapons, they're 2 attacks, strength 6. But then like considering that they cost more than 4 Infernal Guard, but only get half the attacks, it's kind of problematic for damage output. As with the rest of the army though, like Bull Centaurs are just a tough nut to crack. They're toughness 5 and 3 wounds. I was stubborn again in the 4-up save probably. So just a really good profile and hard to shift. And there's nothing in this game that will burn through a unit of Bull Centaurs in a turn, like an actual damage output. So I think they got play. And then like just rounding it out for some of the good stuff. Hobgoblin Wolf Riders. Andrew, you've talked about them a little bit. I think they're a great utility in the army. They're just better Wolf Riders than what Orcs and Goblins get. And they bring fantastic mobility to a slow army. And then Sneaky Gits is another cool utility piece. They're a cheap little skirmisher unit that has 2 attacks a pop both at range and in close combat for like 6 points a model. So I think they're really good. You could ambush them if you wanted. I don't recommend that, but you could. And then if you leave them alone, they'll definitely just earn their points back. I played into a mirror match where my buddy had them in a forest, and then like I was trying to charge into them with my ridiculously slow infantry and always failing charges and taking 20 shot Overwatch every time. So yeah, I think they've got play too. On the other end of the spectrum, for things that I think are not so good in the other units, Infernal Ironsworn. I mean, they're good in a vacuum. They've got a great stat line. 2 attacks is great, all that kind of stuff. But they're just too slow to justify their points, and they're outshone again by other elements in the list. Like they're competing for points against Iron Demons and Bull Centaurs, which is like why you'll probably never see them. They're like your Chaos Dwarf chosen, essentially. Again, with a great slew of defensive rules. There's potentially a corner case for them in a Hobgoblin Hort list, which I'll talk a little bit more about when we get to sort of list building and banners. The last unit, which is just not good, and is the only one I think that doesn't really have play, is the Kadai Fireborn. Look, it's a lot of attacks at strength 5, sure, but like unlike the rest of the army, they're actually super easy to kill. So they're always going to get killed as soon as your enemy figures that out, and they're actually quite points dense and intensive too. They're basically demons. They've only got a 5+ regen that they lose if it's magical attacks, and 2 wounds each is not good. Their like signature trick is to do sort of flaming damage to everything that touches them, but for some reason that doesn't give you combat res, which is like terrible, and then they're overcosted. So if you're dead set on bringing Kadai Fireborn, like at least take the man burner upgrade and then give him a cheap magic weapon so that those 4 attacks are strength 6 with some AP on them, and like that's probably the best you can expect out of them. So yeah, about some of the other units in the army, or in other words, Iron Demons. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
I mean, yes, the Iron Demon is cool and the most annoying thing that you own 2 of. It's just like, even when I've set up everything and like charged it with 2 lances of knights and some mounted yeomen, and it just sits there and somehow wins combat with its, what was it?
D3 plus 1
Three,
stomps.
yeah, it is 3 attacks and just like random, like, why is this here stuff. No, it's a giant pain in the ass, and it's cool. And yeah, apparently the Chaos Dwarves are like late World War I machine gun regiment.
Yes.
So it's great. I love the concept of sneaky gits. They seem cool. And aside from that, like, covered most of it. Like, I don't know who Kadai Fireborn offended in a past life. Terrible.
Yeah, they're just like a terrible demon unit.
Yeah. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you guys like mostly covered it. Definitely the standout and special is the train. It preserves points, and as Ryan said, it somehow just wins combats through stupid shit. And even if you do beat it, it's unbreakable. So like if you go into it, you need to make sure you have a way to kill it. Otherwise, it's just gonna preserve its points and never die and lock down, probably some sort of one of your big high strength units trying to fight it, such as my Dark Elf Dragon for a few turns. It really is unfortunate that, say, one of the combat lord dwarfs didn't unlock Infernal Ironsworn as a core unit somehow. Because they are like a super good unit, and like looking at them on paper, it's like 2 attacks with all the other dwarf goodness. Like, I can see myself trying to make a list around a big block of these fuckers, but it's killing your special allotment, and it's you have to deal with war machines that are in there. So like, that and the Iron Demon, like you just don't have enough special points to invest properly into Infernal Ironsworn without sort of hurting the rest of your list, which is unfortunate because as much as I like them, it's just you're never gonna have enough like unless you're skewing your list again, like you're just not gonna have the points to buy them, and I think they're really good on paper.
Yeah, I agree. But I think you'd risk running into sort of the problem that hammerers have in dwarves, where they're like the perfect infantry unit. And people are just like, well, I guess I'm not charging that enormous block of hammers that gets bonuses when it gets charged type situation. So you may run into that if you're like, okay, I took 30, 30's insane, but like I took 20 Infernal Ironsworn with great weapons, 2 attacks a pop, and like a crazy banner. I think people will just ignore you.
But I
It's
don't
a
think
quarter
that's
of your army.
necessarily a thing,
Yeah.
though, right?
Well, no,
If
like I
they
mean,
ignore that unit, that's just as good because it's like, cool. Here's points that I'm not giving my opponent now, and they're too afraid to fight this. Well, mission
sure,
accomplished, right? I
sure,
mean,
but it
yeah, sure,
goes.
they're not earning their points, but I think with dwarves, you're trying to preserve as much as
Yeah,
possible as well, right?
I think you said it well though. Like the Iron Demons will also preserve just as many points, but they'll actually reach out and delete little units that'll add to your point total. So like they lose the internal competition. But
Yeah,
I
fair enough.
agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah. Anything? Did you have anything else, Andrew, in special?
Not until we talk about war machines.
Okay.
Bull centers are cool, but I think you covered anything I would have said about them too. They're not super strong, and again, they're competing with the Iron Demon. Impact hits is nice, but on something like that, you're kind of hoping for more high strength attacks. So strength 4 impact hits is okay, but it's not gonna like win you big combats or anything.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about sneaky gits um, to comment one way or the other on them. Um, and yeah, the Kadai Fireborn, again, disappointing. I guess if you're really like, if this army was hurting for magical attacks, maybe, but you have so many ways to get them into units and stuff. So it's just
Mhm.
like, well, you don't really like, I don't see the point of them. I guess they're fast, but like, meh.
Yeah, I
Who
mean, if they
cares?
had a little, like, if they didn't lose their save all the time, and if they had 3 wounds a pop, maybe like okay. Then like one thing we didn't touch about when it comes to them is they're also like unstable. So then when you lose combat, they sort of just
Like,
delete themselves, which sucks.
yeah.
So yeah.
Well, like maybe like in 8th ed, the dwarves or the chaos dwarves had a spell Storm of Ash, which made the unit it was casted on flammable. So maybe if they still had that spell, which doesn't exist in Old World, so this is kind of
Yeah.
like a useless point. Like maybe there'd be some use there because then they have flaming attacks and you're fighting a flammable unit. But like, eh, they just I don't see their point. They're kind of just a weird. It's like they add them in like at last moment. Like, oh yeah, these still exist. Let's make up some rules right quick and.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like my main issue is just that they are counter to the narrative of the entire army. They do something completely different, and they sort of end up detracting from you, from like your win path, because they'll die and give up points, and your whole game plan is to not give up points. So, okay, so you mentioned it, Andrew. So I think I'll give you the first go on this one. Artillery. What are the standouts and misses? I know you're a fan and you see it as something to build around. So yeah, so why don't you hit us with it?
Okay. So one reason I'm really, a stand for the Chaos Dwarf artillery is sure they're stone throwers and stone throwers are less accurate as they used to be. Um but they kept the multiple wounds D6 rule. So for an army that might struggle against, monsters and dragons and shit like that, um they still have ways to make those units afraid of you. Sure, they're only strength 6 as opposed to strength 8 back in the old rules. But with either taking um, Hellbound, which I don't think is the way to go, or just
No.
keeping like a pocket engineer back there with your um, with your war machines, it helps mitigate some of that accuracy issues. When I played you, Ryan, or sorry, Kevin, I felt like you were being too cautious using that reroll, and you weren't using it on the scatter roll, which is I think the play here to make sure that at least if you're taking the Death Streaker rocket launcher or even the siege cannon, the Dreadquake mortar, making sure that you get that hit on the shot so that whatever's under the hole is taking that full hit, and you should have been targeting like my bigger monsters and stuff. And I think that's their way to sort of deal with dragons or those high toughness monsters, wyverns and stuff like that. Even if it's still like a 50-50 because strength 6, toughness 6. It's gonna make your opponent at least worried about that multiple wounds D6. And it has enough high AP to punch through any sort of armor saves they have. Again, you gotta deal with regen and ward saves, but I think it's still enough to be scary. And then the Dreadquake mortar, with the Dreadquake rule, being able to just take away Swift Stride from Cav is huge. And especially for a slow army, this is a way to sort of level that playing field. So again, a really, strong stone thrower, but then you're also like messing with your opponent's movement, which without having access to illusion magic is pretty helpful as well with the Quake rule. And then the bolt thrower is just a good bolt thrower, which they're super cheap. You can take like a bunch of them, and the skewer rule isn't the worst. So yeah, I'm a fan of all of their artillery pieces. It's just, again, unfortunately in special you're fighting for a lot of points or a lot of other things for those points.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Hell Cannon, you can just throw that in the garbage.
Yeah. Also the Magma Cannon, which you forgot about, but it's terrible.
Is it? It's okay, I think.
Sure.
If you have like leftover points, take it. It's not like gonna win you games, but again, like being able to toss flaming attacks out there is good in a Tomb King's meta. It's gonna keep them honest for a little bit.
It's more expensive than the Death Streakers.
Yeah, that's kind of the miss there. Because Death Streakers, they're only like 125 points or 120 points.
120.
Which isn't bad. So that'd probably be the go-to for them or for like artillery pieces. I'm a huge fan of it.
All right.
I know you aren't, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there will be some contention here for sure, but that's cool. Ryan, before I jump into as the negative Nancy on Chaos Dwarf artillery, like how do you feel?
I mean, as the resident triangles of cavalry player, I don't like bolt throwers.
Fair.
Universal distaste. But aside from that, like I do see Andrew's point, but my experience with the trebuchet, which doesn't have rerolls, was not great at like lobbing rocks at dragons and then like out of a 6-turn game, maybe hitting the dragon once.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not super helpful. I do want someone to take a hell cannon just because I want someone to be insane enough to take a war machine that might just choose to move and then prevent itself from shooting.
Kill its handlers or something crazy. Yeah.
Which it basically has the opportunity to misfire twice in a turn.
Yeah. It's
which is hilarious.
Terrible. Yeah. It's terrible. I don't even think I'm even going to talk about it because it's so bad. But yeah, okay, cool. Anything else?
No.
Okay, so for the contentious part, so I am not super hot on Chaos Dwarf artillery. I think it's the saddest part of the book that the artillery faction has subpar artillery. You got no cannons, which is a big miss because they're the best type of war machine out there. You've got nothing beyond strength 6. which is again like not good. You can't use your artillery reliably to fight back against high toughness targets. Like strength 6, you want to get beyond that so that you can wound them sort of semi-reliably when you got a low volume of shots. So yeah, that's like my overall take. In terms of like the individual pieces, the magma cannons I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Just pretend they don't exist. They're not very good. If you're going to take war machines, go for the Death Shriekers or the bolt throwers. The magma cannons, they're more expensive than all of those, and then they're strength like 4, and they're just not very good. The Death Shriekers. So I've played a ton of games with Death Shriekers. Generally, I like them. I think their problem is just that they're incredibly unreliable. So when you start to do the math on it and look at sort of their odds of hitting anything, you hit 1/3 of the time because when you're not under the central circle of the template, they're like strength 3, no AP, so they're essentially useless. So you're hitting 1/3 of the time, and then you're wounding a monster half of the time. Then they need to fail their saves, regen saves, and ward saves, and then you get to roll a d6 for damage. So like, sure, you've got a big like a chance to do that big 6, and I've done it and it feels great, but it's super unreliable as a way to dish out damage for 240 points worth of an army. Like that's over 10% of your army. Like at the competitive level, you've just got better options. Like the gambler in me loves Death Shriekers because I just want to see that big 6 come up. And like it has, right? In one game at back at CTC, like I managed to sort of one shot a Gorgon off the board, which like felt great because I did 6 damage to it and it just vaporized it. And my opponent lost his mind, which led me to then take sort of Death Shriekers for a long time. But when you look at the actual mathematical chances of that happening, it's a 3% chance of happening. So it's going to happen once in every 5 or 6 games. And that's if your opponent lets you shoot the entire game without harassing them, which is unlikely. But I guess to Andrew's earlier point, there is a psychological effect there, and everybody sort of hides their monsters when the Death Shriekers are out. So there is that. But then once people start to sort of look at the math of it, so I played into a pair of Death Shriekers at CCBB, and I was just like, sure, fire your thing. If I happen to get unlucky and the dice gods hate me today, like you'll do damage. Otherwise, I could just safely ignore them for the majority of the game, and that's exactly what happened. Then moving on to the Dreadquake, I think it's just too expensive for what it does. It's got the same damage output as a Death Shrieker, but it's 185 points with the Ogre Loader, so 390 for 2 versus 240. So that's already super pricey. And then the Dreadquake might not shoot every turn, regardless of misfires, because it has like a slow to reload rule, which is meh. And then I get it, like you mentioned, Andrew, if it prevents people from using Swift Stride, which great, and that sounds good in a vacuum. But like at the end of the day, you're a counterpunch army. The enemy will still end up charging you, maybe a little bit slower to get there if you remove their Swift Stride. But like you're still beating them after they've charged you. Like this is not a Bretonnian mirror match where he who charges wins all. Like so. I mean, I'm not sure the Dreadquake is worth. Actually, I'm convinced the Dreadquake's not worth it for 185. Which all brings me to the best artillery in the army, the Hobgoblin Bolt Throwers. So I rate these guys for competitive play. Actually, they're 45 points apiece, strength 6, AP 3, multiple wounds 2. And when you work out the math, assuming that these guys are at long range, if they're not, you're even better. But the 2 bolt throwers for 90 points literally have the exact same damage output as a Death Shrieker or a Dreadquake. And then, like I mentioned, within 24 inches, their damage output's actually better. Bolt throwers don't misfire, so you don't need to invest into somebody to babysit them, right? Taking your 240 points of Death Shriekers and adding 100 points-ish of Demon Smith is just, throwing good money after bad type situation. And then the through and through rule on the the bolt throwers, I think, is a lot more effective than bombardment. And it widens the target set that they can shoot at. So as Ryan mentioned, these guys are like a death sentence to ranked up cavalry. So Knights of the Realm, for instance, if you got to deal with Knights of the Realm, like accept no substitute to a pair of 45-point Hobgoblin bolt throwers to get the job done. And then here's a funny little trick you can do with 3 or 4 of these bolt throwers because of the long range. If you space them out evenly across your back line, you can completely prevent your enemy from ambushing for the measly sum of 135 or 180 points, or 190. Sorry, 145 or 190 points. So that's just great fun, and then you could force your opponent to sort of spend the entire game chasing down those 4 dumb 45-point bolt throwers. So I do rate these guys actually, and I will be bringing them in my next tournament. But overall, I'm just disappointed that there's nothing above strength 6. There's no cannons, for instance, or whatever. So yeah, it is what it is. Moving on to magic items. Now that I've dissed, well, actually, do you want to give me a comeback on that, Andrew? Since you're so hot on the artillery, or like, do you sort of see where I'm coming from?
I see where you're coming from. One thing to note, though, for the Dreadquake is if you do buy the ogre, which you fucking better.
Yeah.
It is a little bit more autonomous and can probably defend itself better because you have an ogre there as well fighting. It's got 2 attacks, strength 4. So it makes it a little bit more defensible with the ogre there. Again, I still would rate the rockets more than the bolt throwers just because you're relying on ballistic skill shooting as opposed to just sort of a dice roll. So, hobgoblins don't have like super great elf BS. So it's like, cool, you might hit, but it's only ballistic skill 3. So with any sort of modifiers, like you're probably just going to miss it every time anyway. In this game, ballistic skill shooting isn't like that reliable. And if you only have 1 shot and you're going to miss most of the time, like, might as well not bother. Whereas at least with the Dreadquake or with the stone throwers, you have a little bit more reliability with the engineers around to be able to try to re-roll that hit. That would be my counter argument there.
Sure.
I mean,
And having sorry, go ahead.
My counter to all of that is that for 1,365 points, you can have 2 Death Shriekers, 3 Bolt Throwers, 2 Hellbound Iron Demons, and 2 Dreadquake Mortars.
Exactly. And then just roll a bunch of misfire dice and hate your life choices.
Yeah.
Having ran bolt throwers and dark elves, like it's real feels bad, even with high ballistic skill when you ain't hitting shit most of the game, and then everything is in combat like 2 turns later.
Yeah, I guess the ones in Chaos Dwarfs though are such a low points investment that if you miss your shot, it's like it's fine, right? And then if you happen to find a great target for them, like, I don't know, I'll pick on Knights of the Realm again, then you're super happy because your 90 points or of bolt throwers just deletes units that are worth more than that. So yeah, okay. I think we talked about artillery enough. Moving on to magic items. Ryan, do you see any standouts in terms of item selection?
So some of these are going to be super situational things, but for example, the Dark Maul on a bull-centered Torok could be cool. Just running around with Strength 5, AP 2 Killing Blow because you can.
Sure.
But really, like, the weapons, nothing super impressive. Like, if I had 35 points, I might throw the Dagger of Malice onto a Hobgoblin Con because Frenzy Hatred. The armor, couldn't care for anything. Mantle of Stone, coolest thing ever on anything with a great weapon.
Yep.
What do we got? Oddly enough, like in Andrew's conception of this like brick of Ironsworn with it, or of Infernal Ironsworn with its, detachments of Infernal Guard, the Lamasu's Beard banner could be a thing. Like, you could make this weird blob of army that's got a 5-up ward against shooting and whatnot. Kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's
The-
got some play. Yeah.
yeah. The banner of -1 to be hit from shooting is also cool.
Yeah, always good.
None of that, like, yeah, the Lamasu blood just auto dispelling. And I don't understand why the Scroll of Binding is a more expensive power scroll.
I don't understand either.
Is it because only if you roll snake eyes on any two of the dice instead of any double? Is that why it's better? I don't understand why it's 10 more points.
It's not worth it.
But no, like, all in, like, the generic magic items in the rule book are probably what you're going to take, other than Lamasu blood. Maybe a demonic familiar if you're being weird.
Yeah, I think you've touched on everything I was going to say. I don't think the army has a great selection of magic items, frankly. I think there's one standout item, and that's the Mantle of Stone. This is the biggest one you're going to see all the time in basically every Chaos Dwarf list. It's also an extremely common item, which you can stack for a lot of fun. 30 points a pop gives you +1 toughness, -1 initiative. It just builds into your strength as an army, which is high toughness, and then your initiative is already garbage level in the army, so it doesn't really matter that much. And initiative's not one of those stats that kills you if you bring it down to 0 or whatever, so like nobody cares, it's fine. You can make like just a fun level 4 toughness 9 caster on a flying mount if that's your jam. I don't think it's the way to go, but like you could just have fun with it and stack Mantles of Stone to make some silly combinations. I think there's two other items that have a situational value. I think the first one is the Demonic Familiar, which Ryan you touched on at the end there. It's good because it reduces the ward save and regen save of targets that are in close combat with the bearer by 1. I think there's some fun but slightly but suboptimal combos you can pull off with that. So if you could take a combat character on a mount, it'd be great, but you can't. So having a Sorcerer Prophet with the Demonic Familiar, and then you stack that with, like, for instance, the spell also called Demonic Familiar in a confusing turn of events, which is like the Demonology Assailment spell that ignores armor saves, but then gives you, and then you reduce their ward and their regen. Like you could do something fun with that, or if you use the Blood of Hashut, which is like the grenade that to wound rolls basically on the armor value of your enemy. And then they don't get an armor save, and you get to reduce their wards and regens. Like that could be fun too. So again, situational use out of the Demonic Familiar. The Obsidian Vambraces is another one you guys didn't touch on, but which I don't hate for 15 points, and there's some like corner case use out of it. So it gives you +1 strength and +1 magic resist, or 1 magic resist, but it will eventually explode when you roll a 1 to hit. So what I will say is that you could put that on a big unit and give it +1 magic resist until it's in combat, which is good. And then don't underestimate getting that first round of combat in at +1 strength. If you're, for instance, a Bull Centaur Torok with Great Weapon and this item, your first round of combat will be at strength 8, which is pretty gnarly. Give him 2 Mantles of Stone and strength 8 T7, and like you got something potent there. In terms of banners, there's 3 that I think are viable. So the Lamasu's Beard is the first one. The issue with the Lamasu's Beard, though, so it gives you ward saves to the unit and surrounding units and magic resist for 65 points. It's good, but like the problem is it's too expensive. You have to either take an Infernal Iron Sworn brick, which is a ton of points, as we mentioned, or a BSB to use it. So, and you generally don't need a BSB. So like for those reasons, you don't tend to see it very often. The Ashen Banner, as you mentioned, Ryan, classic, -1 to hit at range. It's matchup dependent, but it's good. The Overseer Sigil is good if you're going for the Hobgoblin skew list. you toss that on and they lose the levy rule, so they can use the leadership 10 of your general, which is just going to be super useful in a horde army, especially
There
if
is a
you're
downside to that, though.
in terms of
If they lose the levy rule, so yes, you do use the leadership of your general.
yeah.
However, they also will cause panic in your units that are not levies now, which they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah,
it
sure,
seems
but
You
there
have
more
are
like
lots
a
of high leadership,
liability.
so it's
yeah,
fine. But
exactly. Yeah, that's
I don't
exactly what I
know.
was going to say. But you're leadership 10, so
but it can lead into one of those cascading system failure problems if someone kills your general and then goes after them.
yeah. Then they've got like warband though, so they're
Leadership 8.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and then last one I'm gonna say is for the banners. Bonus points if your opponent is a dwarf and you bring the Shroud of the Ancestors to get hatred against dwarf players, which is just fun. Into your poor dwarf buddy who's already going to be struggling into you. So just pile on the hate there. Yeah. Okay. So that's magic items for me. What about Andrew? Do you have any standouts in this section?
No, I think you guys covered like the big ones. The weapons aren't super great. Um, a lot of them feel like I wish I can take a combat character. Like the Black Hammer of Hashut isn't bad, but the only models who can take it are either your Sorcerer Prophet, or your Combat Lord Dwarf. So just mobility issues there.
Yeah.
And your Sorcerer Prophet probably wants something different on them
Yeah.
if they're flying around on like a Torque or a Lamassu. So it's kind of just like missed opportunities. Again, the magic armor, you know, um, kind of expensive and situational. Like the Mask of the Furnace is cool because you can potentially get a character up to a 2-up armor save. But you're not going to see that many flaming attacks either. So like the whole 3+ ward against flaming is kind of never going to come up. Mantle of Stone is like a big standout though. Being able to raise your toughness up. It's just going to help with that defensive skew that you're probably going to be trying to play for. So that's a great piece of tech that you can spread around, especially on your characters, which you're trying to preserve anyway. The banners, I'm kind of like, they're okay. I think the generic magic item banners are though probably a little bit more useful for the
Yeah.
army. And then the Vial of Masu Blood, I think, is pretty clutch. Just the way magic is in this game, and if you're just the way the dice rolls, it favors the caster as opposed to the dispeller.
Yeah.
So being able to have this in your back pocket for like one of those clutch spells that you feel like might be like one of those game changers, just to be able to shut it down for a turn and keep yourself safe. I think this is a cool piece of tech to have. Other than that, like there's not too many real standouts here, in terms of magic items.
Yeah, I don't hate the vial
Two.
of Lamisu blood either. I don't typically take it, but I mean it is a helpful like insurance policy for that. That game where you poorly position your Black Orc War Boss and then he takes like a Vile Tide Hagtree Fetish to the face and you're about to lose a 400-point model for like to a bunch of strength 1 attacks and then you pull out that thing type situation. So I don't
100%.
disagree with you. It's just it's
pretty
just
expensive though.
yeah,
40
exactly.
points. It's like
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
other points you can probably want to spend that on, but like at the same time, you're probably not going to be disappointed if you do have this as well, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree. Let's. I left it off of the sort of the show notes there, but let's talk a little bit about the lore of Hashut here. Also, just to mention some of the spells. I think there's really like, for my part, there's one real standout, and then there's one sort of corner case type situation that you can use. The first, like for me, the standout here is Storm of Ash. You're probably going to take this most games. Storm of Ash is a bubble of 9 inches around your caster. That's creates like a -1 to hit to all the attacks that are launched from inside that bubble, whether it's like shooting or close combat. I think there's like, especially in a high toughness army, like it builds to your strength, and it's just like super useful and a really good spell. And then the second one I don't hate is the Curse of Hashut, which is a magic missile spell, which doesn't like have play in every matchup, but the way it works is it forces your enemy, it ignores all rules for targeting characters, and it forces your enemy to take a toughness test. If they fail it, they take like a terrible amount of damage, like strength 5, AP, whatever, ignores armor save type situation. But if they passed it, the toughness test, it doesn't do much. I like that spell into some matchups. So if you're going into undead, I think there's play there for targeting out Tomb Banshees, which have terrible toughness, and you can just like delete even if they're hiding, or target some Hierophants on foot from like on the Tomb King side. I think there's some play there, or just like a level 4 caster on foot or in a unit or whatever. Like it's not a bad spell either. What do you guys think about the spells? Anyone?
I think it's a little disappointing that Storm of Ash wasn't the way it was in 8th, where it made a unit, it was casted on flammable, because then that could have like teched off of some of the other abilities that the Chaos Dwarfs had, and you could have had some cool play there. Although its current iteration as well is pretty useful, especially if you are worried about shooting heavy armies, wood elves, and
Well, no, because they'll be out of 9 inches, right? So it won't impact them.
Oh, I misread that. Okay,
it's more of a close combat thing.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean,
but like
anytime you can skew the to hit roll is pretty good.
And I think there's like a good 1-2 punch there when if you take, for instance, a Black Orc War Boss and you give him the Effigy of Mork, which makes him -1 to hit, and then you pop this thing off and suddenly he's -2 to hit, and then it's just fun for everybody involved. Yeah. Okay. Ryan, you got anything for spells, or ready to move on?
No, my only. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how Flames of Hashut is worse Hammer Hand.
Oh yeah, Flames of Hashut's terrible. I didn't even mention it's just
so bad.
Don't take it. Do not take it. Yeah. Okay.
I would take Flaming Sword from Elementalism over that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would take, I think, any spell over that. Period. Like I'd take Curse of Arrow Attraction over that. I'd take anything over it.
Hey, when you have 24 Peasant Bowmen, Curse of Arrow Attraction is
fair.
A lot spicier.
Fair. When you bring the 25 Infernal Guard with blunderbusses,
7 short bows.
Yeah, exactly. Then it has value. Fair. You can't take it in this army, to be clear, but okay. So let's talk about list building. So let's start with like list archetypes. Andrew, what do you think are some of the good type of lists that you can create out of this army?
I think we covered most of this in our pros section. So you can do like the high toughness points denial type lists with the, either a big fuck off block of Infernal Guard paired up with
basically anything.
The Iron Demon. Throw your level 4 caster on a Lamassu and just stack as many points worth of Mantles of Stone as you can on them. Just like weird shit like that. And, that's your skew of I'm not going to give up points. I'm not going to win big, but, something's going to pick off your chaff or, a small throwaway unit. And then all of a sudden the Chaos Dwarf player wins by like a 11-9 or something. So that's your one list you can make. The one I want to do and kind of tried to make my list that we're going to talk about later. I tried to do more of a gun line, although we'll talk about it then. So you can do like the more like, here's all my war machines and my gun line and my Iron Demons there still preserving points, but also has a machine gun on the roof. So, you can still do like heavy shooting. And I don't think that's a bad way to go either.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you can't do an all cav list like every other army, but dwarves, what'd you expect?
Yeah, fair.
I think those are their two big plays. Something I don't think we touched on though was given the spell lores that the wizards have access to, you can also get away or get around sort of the slow movement of some of the dwarf stuff.
Yep, 100%.
So you can actually make maybe a little bit more of an aggressive fighty brick of Infernal Guard. So if you do want to go that way, you know, stack some great weapons on them and then just kind of push them in your opponent's face. And it's like, yeah, come at me. You're not going to avoid this brick now. Um, how and just see how they deal with that, right? It's kind of the same thing I do with my witch elves, where I just kind of put them in front of your army super close, and it's like, cool, I don't want to fight this, but now I can't get around it either. So it's either your opponent has to just not charge, or they have to just hope they can punch their way through.
Yep. Yep, and that's like a really good take. I haven't mentioned yet, but like whenever I play this army, my caster almost always takes the lore familiar to pick his spells, and I will either pick the conveyance spell out of elementalism or the conveyance spell out of demonology, depending on what I'm running. And 100% like utilizing those spells to move your infantry blocks around is almost a requirement to get good value out of them, and something I would like strongly encourage people to do for sure. Yeah, and then so sorry, did you have anything else on that, Andrew? Or?
No, those are kind of like my two
Okay.
main points.
What about you, Ryan?
No, like I think we've kind of hit this from a bunch of different angles. Is like
Yeah.
you're either going to be throwing out, a bunch of high toughness stuff that the enemy has to chip through, or bunch more machines. I guess you could kind of do something weird where you just take the minimum amount of Infernal Guard and then a whole bunch of like basically make like a really strange orc army.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of hobgoblins and black orcs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that would be more of a thematic choice for sure.
Exactly.
But yeah, my natural inclination would wind up seeing, several units of Infernal Guard filling out core, probably with fire glaives because they can shoot, but that's just a preference.
Yeah.
And then, throw rocks at stuff.
Fair. Yeah, for my part, I think the thing that you can do super well, which we've talked about, is like the high toughness, resilient, grindy type list. And that'll give you a big advantage into the majority of matchups that you're going to run into, with a few exceptions that I've mentioned and we'll cover again later. But yeah, I think you can also make a decent take all comers type list out of Chaos Dwarfs. You bring pair of Death Shriekers or whatever, some Bull Centaurs because they're not bad, a level 4 caster, a tough train or a wyvern or whatever, and this will just give you like a fun to play against, fun to play army that everybody will be happy about, and then we'll still win you games. There's definitely like a take all comers type list that you can build out of this, and then if you're not worried about competitiveness and you want to roll into something thematic, there's also great options. Like you can do the artillery gun line. You can do what I call the Bulls on Parade list, which is like 2-3 units of Centaurs with Tauruks and a Lamisu or a Taurus, which is just it looks amazing on the table and it is a lot of fun. Or you could do like Ryan, mentioned the I'm not greenskin army with just hobgoblins, all flavors of hobgoblins and black orcs, and just roll with that and have fun. So thinking about all of that, and the strengths and weaknesses that we've discussed and the highlights, like what would be your go-to to building a strong Chaos Dwarf list? And then are there any auto takes on that list? So I think I'll go first on this one. I think for me, from a competitive standpoint, there's some highlights that are like first tier that you're probably going to end up bringing. That's a Black Orc War Boss, Iron Demons, a Sorcerer Prophet. I think like once you've put those elements in your list, it ends up being a lot of points already. And then at like a second tier of competitiveness, that still has play, I would definitely put the Hobgoblin Con on Wolf, probably first tier, frankly, but the Hobgoblin Con on Wolf, the Wolf Riders, Bull Centaurs, Bull Throwers, I would also slot into a list. And I think, the situation when you're building a list out for Chaos Dwarfs is that your best pieces are also your most expensive. And so, as I mentioned, or I was sort of alluding to, the list will kind of write itself. The Black Orc Warboss, the level 4 caster on their own, like a caster on foot even, is like 600 points. And then a pair of Iron Demons is just over 600 points. So once you factor that in, which is like 1200 plus the 500 points of slow moving infantry in your core, you're at close to 1700 points and your list's basically written. You add a little bit of spice to taste, and that's that. And I mean, you're unfortunately with this army, like one of the problems I mentioned was that it was tough to get like alternative builds in, and your options like to build outside of what I just mentioned are not like they're not too different or varied. Like let's say you go for your level 4 being Taurus or Lamasu rather than a Wyvern, it's still a 450 to 550 point for a single character with magic items. So like you're still going to be left with the same kind of conundrum. And then if you go with Bull Centaurs rather than Trains, for instance, it's going to work out to be more expensive for a unit of Bull Centaurs and a Torok than an Iron Demon. So like it's just you're going to have 3 or 4 big rocks that sort of make up the list there in terms of point allocation. Again, like I'll just harp on this one last time though. Like your list design is super limited by the fact that you don't have that your combat character can't be mounted and that you can't take cavalry and core. So those are things that I would change if like I was sort of king for a day type situation. And then which means that all your meaningful choices in list design is like, am I taking centaurs or trains? Am I taking a wyvern or a tooled up caster on a mount? And then, any one of those items will give you a significant amount of artillery. So that's basically what list design sort of boils down to, as far as I'm concerned. Do you agree with that, Ryan?
Oh, I agree with your points. I mean, I would never build a Chaos Dwarf army because it doesn't suit any play style that I fall into. So I don't really have particularly strong opinions about it, but I respect what I run into across the table, which is, unkillable wall of angry short people. So
Fair. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I kind of agree with most of that. Um, it is hard to sort of step outside of any of these, um, I guess like archetypes. Um, yeah, I don't really have much more to add that we guys didn't already cover.
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. Let's talk about then some matchups and competitive play. So, Ryan, I'll throw this one to you first. Like, what do you think are strong matchups for the faction? Like, both in terms of archetype or armies or whatever.
I think they'll play well into anything that what am I trying to say here? Like anything that's coming at them at like toughness 3-4 moderate armor, like they're gonna get
Yep.
chewed through between the Iron Demon and the capabilities of the infantry units. They'll be able to take that well. They can handle, they can be on the receiving end of a whole bunch of cavalry, things like that. I do think, as you've mentioned a few times before, that they'd struggle into lots of monsters or very difficult dragons. Undead's kind of a toss-up because you do have the tools to take out the Hierophant fairly straightforward, but at the same time you won't do great just like launching into a brick of nigh unkillable infantry.
Graveguard or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but like that's what I found, for example, is like with my Bretonians, I fairly consistently get curb stomped by the Chaos Dwarfs. But at the same time, like, it's not like I'm not able to fight the Infernal Guard or the Bull Centaurs or take out the character or anything like that. It's usually just the inability to successfully take out the Iron Demons and a few other like miscellaneous items.
Mhm.
But like once I can actually get in there, Strength 5, AP -2 still kills Chaos Dwarfs.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's that.
All right, thanks for that, Ryan. So I'm gonna kick in now. Ryan's gonna have to exit. So yeah, I think in terms of matchups and competitive play, thematically, as sort of Ryan just mentioned, I think the type of target you're looking for is lists that don't have a lot of high strength attacks. I think T3 armies in general are something that you're going to do well into. Things that don't outgrind your Chaos Dwarfs is decent matchups too. So you're going to be doing well into take all comers type lists. I think Oops All Cavalists are something Chaos Dwarfs do fairly well into because they work by breaking the opponent on the charge, and that simply will not happen to your army. So that's good. And then I think small aside here in terms of deployment for this army, because I haven't put it anywhere else. I think because you're generally a lower mobility army than your opponent, your matchup is going to really determine how you deploy this army. I think into highly aggressive, fast armies. So Bretonnians are a good example. You'll want a more defensive, closer together sort of style, castle style type deployment with fewer ways for your enemy to sort of wrap around your line, probably deeper in your deployment zone too. And then into less aggressive, slower shooting armies, you're going to want to spread out and be a little bit more conventional about it. So yeah, I think that's it's also helpful in terms of themes and matchups. Some of the better matchups for Chaos Dwarfs specifically. So Cavalists in general are good. I think Bretonnians are one of our better matchups. Oops All Cav Empire armies is also a great matchup for Chaos Dwarfs. Nomadic Waz are decently good matchups too. Anything that's a take all comers type list with a bit of everything in it, you'll do well into. So orcs and goblins frequently. Beastmen is another good example. Ogres and lizardmen are sort of the take all comers type armies that you want to fight. And then T3 low strength armies. So all of your non double dragon elf lists, you'll do pretty well into. On your end, Andrew, what do you think about matchups for this faction? Good matchups.
Yeah, I think like anything that's sort of, I know this is gonna sound weird given that toughness is like the biggest strength, but like those high strength, low attack armies, I think you're gonna do well just because you're gonna be able to mitigate some of the high strength, but also punch back with the tools you have in the list. So like you said, Cavalists don't have a lot of model count, and they try to win on the charge. And if they don't break what they hit on that first charge, they're kind of fucked once they get into like a protracted combat. So, Bretonnians, Empire, Cavalists, like all the ones you mentioned. But even like I'd say stuff like ogres might struggle against you because yeah, they have high strength attacks, but like you're just gonna be able to outgrind them,
Yeah.
and they don't have enough attacks to sort of bury your like units in needing to do a lot of saves. Like sure, the attacks they have are efficient, but it's just not going to be enough to break like your blocks, right?
Yeah, I
So
agree.
I think that's where their strengths are. But they might struggle a bit more against stuff that has like a lot of attacks. But I guess we'll talk about that in the next segment.
Yeah, sure. So speaking about the next segment, so bad matchups for Chaos Dwarfs. So I think thematically you're going to really struggle into things that are more unkillable than you are, just because they can outground you, and then you don't have the damage output to really to bring to the table to do well against these kinds of armies. I'm thinking about things like monster mash type armies, which is case dependent. Like if they're easy to damage, like they don't have a lot of saves, you can get through it. But lots of toughness 6 is going to be problematic for you or higher. And then magical dominance lists are going to be problematic for you. And then cannons, I think, are worth a mention. They're like your natural predators. So beware, like iron demons will melt to cannon fire. So when you come up to a match and your enemy's rocking a pair of cannons, like that could be problematic from the get-go. Your hardest matchups, more specifically, so I would say undead. I know Ryan said it was a bit of a toss-up earlier, but like frankly, you don't have the damage output to grind through their resurrection before they start winning. And then, as Ryan correctly pointed out, though, the game plan becomes essentially kill the Hierophant or the Necromancer, but you've got to do it at range, and you typically don't have sort of the reliable ranged output to ensure that you delete the Hierophant or the Necromancer, especially if they're mounted. And then you don't have the mobility to really outmaneuver and target them. So it's a bit of a tough matchup, that one. Other things is like lists with sort of unkillable center like piece models. So Chaos Lord on Dragon, for instance, is a good example of things that are just tough for you to sort of get rid of. And then magic dominant lists, I think, are rough for Chaos Dwarf. So, for instance, Mortuary Cult is probably the best example here. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, basically, I agree with all that. Anything like the high tough, like weirdly enough, Chaos Dwarfs on Chaos Dwarfs is probably like super hard for Chaos Dwarfs.
Yeah.
Like that's gonna be a boring ass game because you're both
Yeah.
just gonna bounce off each other.
Agreed.
But like any high toughness stuff, I think you're gonna struggle with. And also, if you're fighting like mass hordes, so like undead, if you aren't able to pin down the Hierophants or the main necromancer for the vampire accounts, like you're just gonna struggle to chew through big blocks of like undead that come back.
Yep.
You're just gonna get bogged down. You're not gonna get any points. And again, chances are both those armies will be able to outmagic you as well.
Yeah.
And even stuff like that gets around, your high toughness. So you mentioned in one of the other segments, Hag Tree Fetish and Vile Tide. Like, you're gonna be scared shitless of that with even shit like your Iron Demon. Oh, can it hurt the Iron Demon?
No,
I
it
don't think
can't.
it can.
That's the only thing that
can't.
it can't hit. Yeah. Because it's toughness.
But
The rest of
depending
your
on
army,
yeah, like your character. So like if you don't take a bunch of Mantles of Stone on your level 4, he's gonna be scared of that. Your Black Orc boss on the Wyvern is not gonna be happy to see that, coming around. But even stuff like Danny's, Zinch, what I'm trying to say, like magic missile lists. That's gonna whittle some of your stuff down.
Yep.
Zinch, Warriors of Chaos, like heavy list, like if they take that caster, you're gonna have a hard time shutting down their spells because they'll be casting with like +5, I think.
You could go to +6 technically. Yeah.
Yeah, depending on how they build the list and if they drop them in like bunker units, you're gonna have a hard time trying to out magic that, and they're gonna be able to leverage that against you. So I think those are like you said, like those are kind of their big struggles.
Yep, agreed. And then you mentioned the mirror match, and I think you're totally correct on this one. I've played 3 mirror matches so far, and it just boils down to who teched the hardest into toughness. Because the guy who's invested the most points into being unkillable will just win that one. That's how all 3 of those matchups have worked out for me. So. Okay. So pivoting from that slightly, how well do you think, Andrew, that Chaos Dwarfs rank up in the competitive meta? Do you think they have like the tools to compete with the top dog armies out there? And then, can you pull a tournament winning type army list out of this army book?
I mean, I think you've proved that it can. You do very well in our local meta, um, and you've won an event.
Two.
Did you?
Yeah, two.
Two? Well, there
Yeah.
you go. Two. Um, so I think yes, especially if your opponents haven't made their list in a way to like sort of counter some of this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I'm trying to think. There's not a lot of armies that can skew this heavy into like defense, like maybe other dwarves, but not a lot of people tech against that to begin with. Like there's a lot of like cav armies around right now, or the undead, like just kind of here's my big blocks of shit, like have fun trying to kill it. Not a lot of people tech against dwarf or chaos dwarf strengths, I find. So I do think like they can compete very well in the meta just because they're almost counter meta to what's
Yep.
going on right now. And they still have tools to win. Now, how well they win at events, again, we said this multiple times, they are going to struggle to get those like high points games.
Mhm.
So if your event is stacking the 20, whatever your differential score is over win loss draw, which some of the events we ran here in Ottawa we did that, you might struggle to get those high placings, but I think you still will do well in events, because you are kind of like a stat check army in that regard.
Yep. I agree with everything you said, man. Like in general, I think there's some absolute competitive play that you could pull off with this list. I think it's above like sort of average power level as an army, but I wouldn't put it as one of the top dog armies out there because unfortunately you're probably going to be a bit of a one trick pony, like that high toughness, low mobility type army that's hard to get rid of. I think you've got all the tools to win games pretty easily because as you mentioned, Andrew, like your opponents are not often going to be teched out to deal with you. So you can definitely win events like RTT sized events and bigger with this army for sure. But I don't think this army is like an especially strong contender to win like a GT or like a really large event. Because you'll do well, but unfortunately you're going to run into some of those natural predators which we've described in terms of matchups in a larger event, and then you're just gonna have a really hard time getting a W out of that, and you're probably not going to be able to podium, taking some losses along the way, even if it's just one loss.
Yeah,
So yeah,
unless you have like a really good win path to the
yeah.
top, like you just somehow get all the matchups you want just based on standings, like yeah, they are going to struggle.
Yeah, which like frankly is most matchups. So that sounds good from like the get-go. The problem is that most of your natural predators are things that are going to be in the top brackets, So when you
Yeah,
eventually do
100%.
make your way up there, and then you run into one of those lists, it's going to be a tough like it's going to be a lot harder for you than it is going to be for them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so as we're just before we close out this episode, let's talk about your the list you drew up as like a sort of prospective player to the faction. And then like present the list, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion on it.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to preemptively say my intent for this list was to go heavy gun line. But as I mentioned before, as I was going through the units and the options, I kind of waffled on that a bit because, again, I feel like this army is a little bit spoiled for choice in like good units and things you want to take. So by the time I finished the list, I kind of lost the skew I was going for, and I added some stuff that maybe isn't useful in the way I was hoping to play this army.
Yeah.
So again, I will probably have to go back to the drawing board on it a bit, but I'll go through it now.
Yeah, I just one sec before you do, like to that comment, before you jump in and like give us the whole list. I think you did kind of deviate away from like the overall sort of skew you were going for, the intent you were going for. But I will say, like, it did turn into, as a result, like a good like take all comers type list rather than a gunline type list.
Yeah, fair play. So I went with the Sorcerer Prophet as my general. Duh. He's a level 4. I threw him on the Lamassu with a Talisman of Protection, a Mantle of Stone to make him a little bit more defensive, and my favorite lore, Demonology. Then I took, and there are war machines in here, so this guy will make sense. Demon Smith Sorcerer. I just kept him bare bones, so I didn't even give him the level 2 because he's just gonna be chilling in the back. He's on foot, and he took Elementalism. Um, I really wish they had access to battle magic for that fucking fireball, but whatever. Um, then I took a Hobgoblin Con. I didn't give him any magic items. I just kind of tried to keep him cheap, cheap, cheap. But I did give him the short bow and throwing weapons. And he's on a giant wolf. For core, I took 24 Infernal Guard. That's like my Infernal Guard tax. I tried to make them sort of like a little bit of an anvil. So I just gave them shields, drilled, and just full command, no magic. I gave him the war banner just for that static combat res.
Sure.
Hopefully, I think that's just kind of like a standard on most infantry blocks these days. And then I gave them a detachment of 12 Infernal Guard with the Hailshot Blunderboss. In retrospect, I probably should have just gave them the Fire Glaives instead. I think they're a little bit more useful in smaller shooting blocks of Infernal Guard. Because I don't think I'm going to get the full effect of the Hailshot Blunderbuss's abilities with such a small unit. But that's my core units. For special, I took the Iron Demon because Iron Demon. I didn't take the Hellbound upgrade. I guess I probably should have in retrospect. I kind of just thought about the rerolls to the misfire thing about it, and I forgot all the other abilities it does.
Yeah.
So I'll probably try to find a way to find points and fit that back in just to make sure it's a little bit more defensible. Then I took a Deathstreaker rocket launcher. Again, I left that just bare bones. I didn't take the Hellbound just because I was trying to keep as many of these units like lean on points as possible. Because again, as I said before, while I was making the list, I added everything I wanted and then realized I was like way overcosted. So I was trying to make cuts along the way back. And then my first sort of deviation from the gun line was I remember playing you with your bull centaurs. I'm like, well, they're really good, and I kind of want a bit of mobility with some punch. So I took 4 bull centaur renders with great weapons, a standard bearer and a musician. Again, the standard bearer just for that extra little bit of combat res. And they were supposed to be sort of like a counter punch or to bail out the Infernal Guard if they got into a combat they were going to get ground out in. Finally, for rare, I took a Dreadquake Mortar. Again, the other stone thrower that I think is really good. And with the Dreadquake rule, I felt they would help me at least control some of the flow of the game with the ability to take away Strift Stride and make stuff difficult terrain. So like -1 movement for my opponents and myself, I guess, but I wasn't planning to really move. And then finally, Hobgoblin Wolf Riders, I took 5 and I gave them basically all the upgrades, minus the champion and standard. So they have a musician, they got short bows and feigned flight. I didn't give them reserve move. I wasn't sure if that's super useful.
Yeah,
my idea was,
I think it was the right move not to give them reserve move. Like,
yeah, like it's a good ability to have, but the way I want to use this unit, I don't think it's going to be that useful. Like hopefully these guys are just going to kind of be annoying for counter chaff, or pull that cheeky, I'm going to skirt the whole flank of the board and try to get around your back end and like deal with either war machines or that caster hanging out back.
yeah.
So I didn't really see that much of a use of the reserve move. But that's the whole list. So it's 199 points. Yeah, 1995 points. So I still got 5 points to throw around. But if I had to make changes, I'd probably drop the bull centers, switch the weapons on the smaller Infernal Guard unit, and I don't know, maybe make either break down the big Infernal Guard block into smaller blocks and just give them like fire glaives as well, or dump any extra points I have into great weapons for them and just make them, a shitty hammers unit that no one's ever going to want to fight, so they'll hopefully preserve their points that way.
Sure.
But that's basically my idea for the list. And try to just, yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's so as I mentioned before, it's for me, it's a good starting point for like a take all comers type Chaos Dwarf list. Like it's going to be a lot of fun to play and it's going to be a lot of fun to play against. So like I'm good with it in general. I'm going to approach this sort of, let's call it list review from a competitive standpoint, because if we're not looking at it competitively or from an optimizing perspective, your list is fine. So there will be no point. I think the interesting point that sort of came out when you were describing this is that when I talked about like the meaningful choices you can make in list design earlier, you can definitely see it in this list. Because your level 4 is mounted, you don't have the Wyvern, and because you brought some big guns and centaurs, then you don't have that second Iron Demon. So it just goes back to that point that you only like when you're playing Chaos Dwarfs, you're juggling with 3 or 4 big balls of points, and then the rest is sort of ancillary to that. My main critique, or I guess concern with the list, is I don't think you're going to have enough hammers in that list in general. So there's nothing really above strength 6 in the army. The closest you've got is like 4 bull centaurs that are dealing 8 strength 6 attacks, and that's for the whole army. And I don't think like the artillery has, as I've mentioned, ad nauseum at this point, has really the volume or reliability to be enough. You're going to probably struggle to kill like stuff. So I like monsters, especially, I think for this list are going to be an issue. In terms of positive points, like going into the details a little bit more on the positive side, I like your build on your Sorcerer Prophet on Lamassu. I think like I wouldn't change it. Like it's fine. It's good. I think your Hobgoblin Khan on Wolf is a solid pick also. I drop the bow for a shield personally because it's only going to be one shot. Or better, like keep them both and then give him a charmed shield to use those 5 points you have left there at 1995 for 5 points. That would probably be decent. Also for positive points, like I like the bull centaurs. I know you talked about dropping them. I think they're a good pick in this kind of list to bring some mobility and also some punch to the army. They've probably got the most punch of what you're bringing to the table. I'm not sure they need the musician or the banner. These are guys that are going to like either hit the right target and win combat by a ton, or they're going to lose by more than 1 point. So like the banner will not be super important. And then they have a stubborn. So musician is I mean they're just not going to break and flee very often. And then I like the Hobgoblin Wolf Riders. They bring a lot of mobility and utility. I wouldn't change them either. I think they're good. In terms of points for improvement, I mean, you've heard me talk about this, so I'll keep it short. But the artillery plus Demon Smith package is like a lot of points invested. You're spending 390 points for 2 shots, which have the exact same damage output as 4 bolt throwers, which cost 180. I mean, you could take the 4 bolt throwers and buy a second Iron Demon or a Wyvern War Boss. So there is that to think about. I get you're going for a skew, and like that's great. So take it for what it's worth. The Iron Demon, as you mentioned, I would totally give it Hellforged. Like it's just excellent value for money for re-rolling misfires, magical attacks, terror, and the ward save. The core, I think, is potentially something I would revisit. You've already caught on to this, so I won't harp on it too much, but I don't think the 12 blunderbuss buses are going to do much. Like they'll kill T3 units, sure, but that's not really a problem you need to fix in this army. And then all their bonuses are queued off being in large units, so there's that. For the 24 Infernal Guard, I mean, they'll have a lot of combat res, but I think you've probably overinvested in that block a little bit. So you need 12 guys in a banner technically to maximize your static combat res. So, and I get that you'll want a few like leftovers in case you take casualties, but you could probably do with 16, which would give you 4 additional like bodies that you can sort of get rid of before it impacts your combat res, or 20 if you're really really scared about damage. But 24 is probably too much. On a philosophical level, I'm also like not super in love with the game plan of winning the game by like through static combat res, but I think that's like an enormous rabbit hole that a lot of people disagree with me on that we could talk about in another episode maybe before I get into that. So I guess that's my take on the list, and I know you're going to revisit it and everything, but like sort of those comments kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. And like after, having this huge conversation about Chaos Dwarfs, I'm kind of seeing where some of the issues are. I still don't 100% agree with the where we disagree on in terms of the stone throwers, but
Sure.
I do see your point because it is only 2 shots. If anything, to save points, I'd probably drop the Dreadquake for another Death Shrieker instead and just run 2 of those.
Sure.
But I still think I'd want both just because I do like that gambler aspect of I am fishing for that big 6, which,
Yeah.
odds are probably won't happen. But again, it's also that psychological game. It's going to force my opponents to come towards me because they want to get into combat as quickly as possible. And there is enough strength 5 monsters that they can bully around. Chariots they can take out fairly, efficiently. Um, it is my way of like trying to pinpoint those like lone characters and chariots and monsters and things without having to bring one of my own because I just don't have access to a
Sure.
tooled out dragon lord.
Yeah.
Originally in my first like iteration of this list, I did try to like tool out a sorcerer prophet on a great bale taurus for combat, but then I'm just like, well, he's still not a great fighter, and I don't want him in combat to begin with because he's also my level 4.
Yeah.
So I kind of revisited that and just went for the Lamassu build instead.
Yep.
So yeah, that was kind of like my thought process there. But yes, I agree with your criticisms of my list. And again, I'll try to reiterate in the
Yeah.
future.
And like
actually
just
go to build
for
lists.
yeah, and for the record, like I think dual Death Shriekers is like completely viable. I ran it for a super long time. So you're definitely not wrong with that. I would agree with you though that like dropping down the Dreadquake to a second Death Shrieker would free up the points just there for like basically the Hellforged upgrade on your Iron Demon. So like yeah, just some food for that. So yeah, I guess that brings us to wrap up. We've talked enough about Chaos Dwarfs for most people, I'm sure. So yeah, I think let's drop a little tease for our next episode. So we're going to be talking about a team tournament that Ryan and Andrew have been working on here in Ottawa. So we'll be dropping the scoop on that next episode in terms of like when it's going to be, where it's going to be, what's the formats like, all that kind of stuff. So definitely something I think our listeners will be interested in hearing about. So before we head out there, Andrew, anything you want to shout out or talk about on the way out?
No, I don't have much events or anything coming up other than the SBot Toronto, but I'm sure anyone who listens to podcasts or follows the old world stuff on social media already knows kind of about that anyway.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, not much to shout out at all.
Yeah, no, pretty similar for me. We're winding down here on RTTs. Unfortunately, I had to miss the last one due to sort of family circumstances. But I'm also heading to the SBOT in Toronto, so that's the next thing we're looking towards. I think collectively, and we're probably also going to do an episode talking about what we're bringing there at some point. So it's been great. I hope you've enjoyed it, listeners. If you think that this kind of sort of Tactica army review rather than like going through individual unit entries is more useful, like just let us know so we have something to work with for the future there. So thank you very much for sticking with us. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you guys next time.